This podcast is produced by the Harwood Productions Podcast Network. To learn more about the network and to find more of our shows, visit us online at www.harwoodpodcast.com.
Hi, I'm Cindy Harris. Welcome to the Photography Guild.
This month we're going to be talking about capturing sequences when we're out taking photos. This can really bring an interesting element to your photography. Basically, when you talk about sequence photography, you're talking about a group of photos that's either following a logical sequence that shows some sort of passage of time or is telling some kind of story. So it's not just one photo, it's a series of photos. Now, the first type of sequence photography we're going to talk about is showing steps in a process. Now, for this next few sequences, I just used my camera in AV mode. I didn't use my power drive. So even if you had a point-and-shoot camera, you could still participate in doing sequence photography. I don't want you to think that because you don't have a power drive, you're not going to be able to create these types of photos. Now for this series, I went out into my garden and I have an apricot tree, and I was able to see these three very distinct steps in the flowering of the apricot tree. On the left photo, I was able to see a very tight bud. Then I went on to find a bud that was a little more open, and then my third shot is one of the blossoms totally open. Now when you're taking stills like this, you have to keep a couple things in mind. You have to know where you're going. So for this piece, I knew I wanted to start, with basically a small bud, and then I wanted to show the progression to a blossom. But I'm not using a power drive for this. This was a very controlled shoot. So I was using my AV mode, or my aperture value mode. And you can see in these photos that I have a very shallow depth of field. The thing closest is very in focus, but it gets very watercolory in the back. And also for this series, I used my macro lens. So once again, when we talk about sequential photography, don't think you always have to use a power drive, and don't think that it has to be done quickly. As long as you're thinking your shots out, you can create a really nice progression of photos. Now for this series, I used the same technique that I did with the apricot tree, but I moved over to my magnolia tree. And as I was looking at the tree, I found that there was way more steps in the progression of this tree than there was the apricot tree. And as you can see, I ended up getting 7 shots out of this session. So I first started with a very tight bud up in the left-hand corner, then it moved to just starting to open, then we see a little bit of the blossom starts to open up further and further until our last shot is the magnolia totally unfurled. Now what's interesting about this is, again, I used AV mode. Each shot was planned out very methodically, and I had this idea of the steps that I wanted to show. One of the things I love about sequential photography is it kind of takes your photos to another level. In this series with the magnolia, any of these are lovely photos, but they become much more interesting and much more powerful when you put them together as a collection. And if you as the photographer are really thinking that as you're photographing, it really does kind of give a really interesting element to the whole process. Now here's another really fun way to use sequential photography, to capture emotion as it happens. Now for this one, this was when our son was obviously having a birthday, and I thought how fun it would be to be able to capture his emotion as it is happening. Now we don't know what is in the box. I don't even remember what was in the box, but we certainly see his expression coming through. He had that initial initial anticipation, his hands covering his eyes, got a big smile. Oh my gosh, now in the second frame he's having to wait, he's getting a little impatient, and then in the third frame the arms go up and we see his delight at this giant box. So capturing emotion using sequential photography can also be really fun. Now in these first few series, I was just shooting in aperture value mode, taking stills one at a time. Now I want to talk about showing motion as it happens. And when you get into showing motion, you know we have to switch out of our aperture value mode and go into our time value mode, which is our shutter speed. And when we start to go into that, we want to start talking about our power drive. Now your power drive is the kind of thing that if you have a camera that if you hold the shutter button down, it just keeps clicking off, and that's called your power drive. Now if you have a power drive, sequential photography is great because you can really capture some interesting motion. This was one when my husband and I were at a beach and I was standing there holding the camera down, had the shutter speed, and I love how we see no water, we see the little bit of foam, and then we're engulfed in the water. So that's what power drive can do, showing a sequence of images. Now this next set of images is a more contrived set, but I just wanted to show you. I had somebody hold a balloon for me, and then I gave them a pin, and then you can imagine and see what the outcome was. What I did for this though is I set myself up so that I did not move. I could have used a tripod, but in this case I was just holding very, very still, having my arms tucked in, and I think I was even anchored on a table and or a chair. And what I did is I just pressed the power drive down, I let my subject go ahead and pop the balloon, and then you really just wait to see what shows up in your frame. Now here's an example of me using my power drive and telephoto lens out in my garden. As you can see on the top left, I have a hummingbird. Well, we know how quickly those guys move. So he's coming in. Then you can see he's tipped his beak down. He's going to get a sip of water, and then in the third shot he lands. Now I had the power drive going the whole time. There's no way you can capture this with just still images, but this is the kind of sequence that you can get, and you can imagine when these are blown up, you really almost see the expression on this little bird's face as he starts to make his landing, takes his sip, and then rests for just a moment. Now, when we're talking about sequential photography, let's talk a little bit about our gear. Now, for these types of shots, you can really use any lens you have. In some of my shots, I used my wide-angle lens, I used my telephoto lens, and then I also used my macro lens. So don't just assume you can only use one kind of lens. You could basically use any kind of lens. And then in terms of your settings, you have to be mindful of a couple of things. Your ISO, if you're inside the house, you're going to need to crank your ISO up maybe to even 800. And then once you go outside, remember you want your lowest ISO possible, maybe 100 or 200. Now, if you're going to be shooting a series of photos that are very controlled, precise sequences, shoot in your AV mode. That way you can control the depth of field. But if you are going to want to capture some action or emotion, definitely go ahead and switch out of AV mode, go into time value mode. Now, when you're doing this type of photography, your creativity does not have to stop at the photos. You can continue that on with how you display them. One of the things that I like to do is I like to take a series and I like to paste them into a word processing document, and that's what I've done here. And what I can do then is print this out on photo paper, but I get this nice, almost like film strip display, which I think is really kind of a cool thing to do. Another thing you can do is if you want, now this I took with Power Drive because he was jumping on the trampoline, but I can take each of those stills and I could have them in a straight line, or I could mount them so that one is down, one is up, one is down. It's very subtle, but it really mimics the action that I'm trying to convey. So this month's assignment is go out and find a story or find some action. You know, right now, at least here in Northern California, we had a little bit of a warm spell. So some of the trees and plants are starting to do their budding. So that could be interesting. But if you've got a birthday party or a little baby or a dog, you can do all kinds of great things with sequential photography. And don't forget, it's so important to share your photos so that we can see what you're seeing. And the easiest way to do this is go to Flickr and post them on our Photography Guild group site. And the way to do that is just go to our website at harwoodpodcast.com and go to the Photography Guild show notes. And then we have a little bar there that has iTunes, our RSS feed, and Flickr. And if you click on Flickr, it'll take you right to our page where you can upload your photos. And I have to tell you, this last month we added a bunch of new photographers to the group, and they have added some really incredible photos that they have taken from some of the other episodes that we've done in this podcast. So thanks to them. Thanks for being bold enough to share your photos with the world, because you know what? We really love seeing them. The next time we get together, I want to talk about organizing our photographs. You know, it used to be that we just had boxes of photos hanging around everywhere. Well, you know what's funny? The clutter doesn't stop just because the photographs are digital. And what I'm going to be sharing with you is some ideas on how you can get a handle on your digital photographs. You know, you want to be able to view them, you want to be able to sift them out, and share them with people in a fairly organized way. So we're going to go over that next month.
For more information on this episode, go to our website and visit the Photography Guild show notes. Also, if you have any questions or ideas, send us an email. Thanks for watching.